Hi there, Kari Anderson, Principal with Insight Consulting, welcoming you back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. Yep, that exec's me, 25 years in the sector, 7 nonprofits, Washington State and Colorado. You name the thing, I've probably done it incorrectly. Also managed to have some successes along the way. This podcast was developed specifically to share some of those experiences with you to ensure that you've got a better chance of success as you continue your role as a leader in the nonprofit sector. Today's topic, prepping for staff reviews. Yes, we actually need to prep for them in order for them to go well. And well doesn't necessarily mean that your employee is getting high reviews or high marks in their goals. And also may not mean that you agree, right? But there's prep that needs to be done in order for this process to be transparent and understandable. I'd also comment that it's not just prepping for staff reviews, it's prepping for next year's performance objectives and goals. We'll get to that in a little bit. So, setting the framework for today's conversation, some numbers from a recent Gallup poll, right? So, according to Gallup, only 2 in 10 employees say their performance is managed in a way that motivates them to do outstanding work. I think about how difficult it is to hire right now, and I think about how difficult it is to retain staff. And then we've got the stat that says only 2 in 10, right, have a process in place that motivates them to do outstanding work. 74% of employees receive a performance review once a year, most less often. And in our sector, certainly less often, based on some anecdotal evidence. 21% of employees strongly agree that their pay and incentives motivate them to achieve their goals. Only 21% have a current structure that actually motivates them to be high performers. And only 14% of employees have shared that their reviews actually inspire them to improve. So as a sector, we've got some heavy lifting to do in order to kind of change this narrative and improve the situation for our staff, which then should improve it for us as well if your review experience has been less than ideal. So these stats and a lot of other research indicate that traditional ways of conducting reviews have not been working for quite some time. And I'd like to remind you all, I certainly was reminded by board chairs that as a leader, right, so as an executive director or CEO for your organization, a big part of your role is supporting employees in their growth and development. I had a board chair tell me once that if I had the luxury of having even one staff member, I had an obligation to ensure that they were set up for success. And part of that success metric was, do we have clear goals for them? And is there a transparent review process so they can understand how they're being evaluated? So part of this work, right, especially if you have one staff person or more than one staff person, every single employee is different and how you manage and support them is going to be different. Certainly this can be a component in terms of how you are conducting their review process, even though their goals and measurements should be objective. So what does work, right? There's some things that aren't working, but what does work? Certainly ongoing communication and feedback about performance, and this certainly should be more than once a year. My encouragement is that performance should be talked about every week, right? Certainly at one-on-one meetings that are occurring. Those are certainly more formalized settings. Perhaps quarterly reviews, perhaps mid-year reviews, especially if you've got a newer staff person. And in addition to communication, it should also be about setting goals together about performance and thinking about more than organizational goals, thinking about employees' professional goals, perhaps talking with them about personal goals. What other roles could they take on in the organization? Are they interested in terms of cross-training or leading special projects, initiatives, and programs that aren't necessarily a part of their job, but it is part of how we're developing them as a staff member and as a leader in your organization. So together, right, certainly you're going to be leading this conversation because there are obligations that this particular staff person has as a part of their role with you, but you work together to be able to create a plan that has buy-in from all parties. And if there's buy-in from all parties, then there's a much higher likelihood that there's going to be execution of and overachievement, right, of their particular goals. So I had mentioned the need for regular check-ins with regard to performance objectives. I think about when I was in the field and was working with staff, I had Monday check-ins with all of my direct reports, and I had a Monday staff meeting. And at every single one of those one-on-one meetings that I had with staff, those meetings were certainly crafted with the staff's performance objectives, their annual performance goals in mind. The way that I structured those meetings was ensuring that about a third of the meeting was really an opportunity for them to share with me big stuff that they were working on that week. And the big stuff, projects or initiatives, programs, was certainly based on their annual performance objectives. The second third of that meeting was an opportunity for them to share with me what they needed from me that week in order for them to be successful. That could be data, right, from a report. It could be my actual time at a meeting with them. It could be additional information and language that they need to be able to write a press release or write some sort of a white paper brief. So that's the second part of that meeting. And the third part of the meeting really is an opportunity for them to pick your brain, to brainstorm about potential problems that they have, and a reminder for you that you're not there to have all the solutions. It's a chance for them to be able to talk through, those items. So the idea is, if we've got regular check-ins with regard to performance goals, then no one's surprised, right? When something comes up in their review. There's an adage out there, I would hazard a best practice that says that nothing in your review should be a surprise. So if there are things that are going well, that you're pleased with, that the employee is certainly delivering on, they should know about that. Just like they should know earlier than not, hey, if we're missing the mark on something or something isn't going according to plan, let's talk about that and get to solution early so that they have a chance, for success. I'd also encourage you, as you're thinking about structuring that year-end review, it can't just be about, performance objectives, right? And when I'm thinking about performance objectives, this isn't evaluating someone on their job description, which is vague, right? There's rarely anything in a job description that's measurable quantifiably or quantitatively. So we have performance objectives because they're measurable, whether that's fundraising dollars or number of program participants or advocacy initiatives, in light of bills being passed at the state or federal level. So if we've got actual things to measure, that's important, but we also need to ensure that the employee has an opportunity to do a self-evaluation. And I would actually encourage this on a more frequent basis than an annual. I would encourage some sort of self-reflection on a quarterly basis. And if you have a larger staff, and larger means more than one, right? The opportunity for there to be a 360, especially for staff in leadership positions. So the opportunity for the rest of the staff to be able to participate in the review in an anonymous manner, so that feedback from a staff perspective can be taken into consideration when your review is done. And if you've got other leadership positions within your organization, to ensure that those opportunities are availed for other staff as well. So when I'm thinking about upcoming staff review process and the procedures that we have in place, I think about bad reviews that I've had, or bad reviews that I've witnessed or I've heard clients share with me, right? And oftentimes they will say, I just kind of felt like someone was phoning it in, like they were just going through the motions because they had to do this. And when they really got down to brass tacks, oftentimes there was information that should have been shared, but because it was difficult to share, a lot of very smart, very caring individuals that I know will avoid hard conversations. It's part of our job. Our job is to give feedback, both feedback in terms of not just telling someone they're doing great, what specifically are they doing great? And if something is not working, what specifically is it that's not working, so that the employee has an opportunity to rectify the situation. So when you're charged with giving feedback, and all of us are going to be in that position at some point in time, some tips, right, as to how to make this easier for you if conflict or hard conversations are harder. Be specific. I had mentioned, hey, being told you're doing something great or well is nice, but it feels somewhat patronizing at times. I want to know what it is that I'm doing. So whether it's good or bad, right? Be specific and give an example. It's much easier to continue that behavior or to change that behavior if you've got a specific example to be able to work off of. Making it a conversation, right? Conversation means that there's two people that are engaged in the dialogue, not just you that's sharing information. The importance of being empathetic and approaching with kindness and understanding. I heard a great phrase the other day, and it went something like this: assume best intentions. I don't like to assume. There's an acronym and analogy as to what that actually stands for. But I love this saying, assume best intentions. I think most people are just trying to do the best they can and trying to communicate in the best way possible. And so rather than immediately becoming defensive or thinking that I should be taking something personally, assume best intentions in terms of either who's delivering the feedback or who's receiving the feedback. In order for this conversation to hopefully go well in terms of a feedback loop and feedback conversation, the idea of walking the walk and creating a culture where employees feel comfortable sharing feedback with you too, right? We're not perfect. At best, we're good on some days. And while we may have habits and practices that work for us, they may not work for everyone else. One of the best possible things that you can do in a leadership position at your organization is making sure that people feel like they can share feedback with you without fear of consequences. It's humbling for certain, right? But absolutely part of a growth mentality for your organization, and so empowering for others to know that they have this opportunity to be able to share in growing the entire organization. If you've got a tough conversation that you got to have, not all of us feel comfortable being able to have that without a lot of preparation. And so my encouragement always is prepare for these things ahead of time. It allows you to be thoughtful and intentional. And what I would also say to this is if you need to write it down and write down your bullet points and you stick to the bullet points. Oftentimes, hard conversations are fraught with emotion. And if you need to be able to have a tool where you can stay on script and say the things you need to say and not take the bait, if someone else wants to move the conversation elsewhere, it's one of the best possible tools that you can utilize for giving hard conversations or hard feedback. And I would also share, when you're thinking about the feedback loop and reviews, asking on a regular basis how you can better support the employee. Is there a component of the job that they don't have the necessary resources to perform effectively? Is there additional training that they need? Do they just need more face time with you on a regular basis to be able to work through some of these pieces until they feel more comfortable? So if you're able to set yourself up with some of these tools to be able to be thinking about this year's review, you should also be able to start thinking about looking at your job descriptions and how you might better write performance goals that support those, not only for yourself, but for the rest of your team, and ensure that there's thoughtful conversations before the start of your new fiscal year in order for all of your staff to be bought in terms of what's being expected of them and how they're going to be evaluated. If you're looking for more information in terms of how to better this process at your organization, I'm happy to help. Please visit my website, insightconsultinggroup.com. There's an email link there, and I'm happy to send you great examples of performance objectives and great examples of really thoughtfully laid out performance reviews, both for your staff and for yourself. Again, thanks for tuning in today. Appreciate your time. Please join me on wherever you find your favorite podcasts.